The community center buzzed with excitement on that crisp autumn afternoon. People of all ages gathered in the main hall, some standing against walls, others leaning forward in folding chairs. They had come to see the great Anton Korovin, a chess Grandmaster whose reputation stretched across continents. At 48, Anton had the confident stride of someone who had rarely tasted defeat, at least not at a chessboard. The Philadelphia Chess Club had spent months arranging this exhibition. Posters featuring Anton's stern face had decorated coffee shops and community boards throughout the city. Local news had covered his arrival, and chess enthusiasts had marked their calendars weeks in advance. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Hector Gomez, the club president, his voice carrying across the packed room. "What an honor to welcome one of the greatest minds in chess today, a man who has defeated world champions and shaped modern chess theory. Please welcome Grandmaster Anton Korovin." The crowd erupted in applause as Anton walked to the center of the room. He wore a navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, no tie. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, and his posture conveyed the natural authority of someone used to commanding attention. He smiled and raised his hands in acknowledgement, clearly comfortable with adoration. Thank you," he said, his Russian accent still noticeable despite decades of international travel. "Chess is life in miniature, they say. Today, we play together. We learn together." The setup was simple but effective. 5 tables with chessboards had been arranged in a semicircle. Anton would play 5 opponents simultaneously, moving from board to board in what chess circles called a simul. The club had selected 4 opponents in advance: the city junior champion, a retired mathematics professor, the state women's champion, and a promising 12-year-old prodigy. The 5th spot would be filled by a volunteer from the audience. For the first hour, Anton delivered a masterclass on chess strategy. He analyzed famous games, explained his thought process during critical tournaments, and answered questions from the audience. People scribbled notes, recorded videos on their phones, and nodded appreciatively at his insights. "Now," Anton said, checking his watch, "shall we play some chess?" The 4 pre-selected opponents took their seats at the tables. Each received polite applause, especially young Lily, the 12-year-old who had been winning tournaments against players 3 times her age. "And for our final opponent," Hector announced, "we'll select someone from our audience. Any brave souls willing to face the Grandmaster?" Several hands shot up immediately, mostly young men with eager expressions. Anton scanned the crowd, his eyes settling on the middle rows where an older woman sat quietly. She wasn't raising her hand. Instead, her attention seemed divided between the exhibition and a worn-out book of chess puzzles in her lap. She appeared to be in her early 60s with straight gray-streaked black hair cut at shoulder length. She wore simple clothes, a beige cardigan over a white blouse and dark pants. Nothing about her suggested she belonged at a high-profile chess event. Something about her caught Anton's interest. Perhaps it was how she seemed to be solving the chess puzzles without looking too hard at them. Or maybe it was just that she didn't seem impressed by his presence. "How about you, madam?" Anton called out, pointing directly at her. "Would you honor us with a game?" The woman looked up, surprised to be singled out. The audience turned to look at her, and a few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Anton's entourage exchanged knowing glances. This was part of his routine, occasionally selecting unlikely opponents for a touch of entertainment. "Me?" the woman asked, her voice soft but clear. "Yes, you," Anton replied with an exaggerated bow. "I notice you have a book of chess puzzles. You must enjoy the game." The woman hesitated, then slowly closed her book and stood up. "I do play a little," she said. More chuckles from the audience. Everyone understood what was happening. The Grandmaster was adding some light humor to the proceedings. The contrast between the world-famous chess genius and this ordinary-looking older woman would make for a good story, a moment of levity before the serious games began. "What's your name?" Hector asked as she made her way to the empty table. "Lin," she replied simply. "Lin Zhao." Lin walked carefully between the rows of chairs, nodding politely to people who had to shift their legs to let her pass. She carried herself with quiet dignity, neither embarrassed by the attention nor seeking it. When she reached the table, Anton pulled out her chair with theatrical courtesy. "Madame Zhao, white or black?" he asked, gesturing to the pieces. "You choose," she answered softly. "Then you shall have white," Anton declared. "The first move advantage, for my new friend." His friends in the front row smiled at his showmanship. This was Anton being Anton, always the entertainer. A photographer from the local newspaper snapped pictures, surely thinking this would make for a charming human interest. Sidebar. Lynn sat down and folded her hands in her lap, looking at the board with calm focus. The wooden pieces gleamed under the community center's fluorescent lights, hand-carved sets brought specially for this exhibition. Anton began the simultaneous exhibition by moving from board to board. At each table, he would stand for a moment, consider the position, make his move, and proceed to the next opponent. He started with Lily, the young prodigy, giving her an encouraging smile before responding to her king's pawn opening with the Sicilian defense. The state women's champion received a thoughtful nod as Anton countered her queen's gambit. The mathematics professor got a respectful handshake before their game began with a Ruy Lopez. When Anton reached Lynn's table, he paused dramatically. "Now, the standard opening move is to advance the king's pawn or queen's pawn," he explained, loudly, speaking to Lynn but projecting his voice for the audience's benefit. "Like this," he added, pointing to the e2 and d2 pawns on her board. Lynn nodded politely but said nothing. Her hands remained folded in her lap. "Take your time," Anton said with an indulgent smile. No rush at all. The audience watched with amusement. This was exactly the kind of moment they had come to see. The Grandmaster showing grace to an amateur, bringing chess to the people. Lynn finally reached forward and moved her king's pawn 2 squares forward, the most common opening in chess. Her fingers were thin, with slight arthritis visible at the knuckles, but she placed the piece precisely in the center of the square. "Ah, excellent choice," Anton exclaimed as if she had just composed a brilliant symphony. "The king's pawn opening, a classic." He immediately responded with the same move, bringing his king's pawn forward to face hers, then moved on to the next table. The audience's attention followed him, most assuming the game with Lynn would be the least interesting of the 5. As Anton continued his circuit, most spectators watched him rather than the individual games. They marveled at his ability to keep 5 different positions in mind, to shift mental gears as he moved from board to board. A few chess enthusiasts with notebooks recorded the moves of each game, but most just enjoyed the spectacle. When Anton returned to Lynn's table for the second round of moves, he found she had advanced her knight to f3, another standard developing move. Nothing surprising, nothing that suggested she was anything more than what she appeared. A casual player who occasionally solved chess puzzles. "Very good," Anton said, making his own move quickly before moving on. By the 3rd round, the exhibition had settled into its rhythm. Spectators drifted between tables watching different games. Some gathered around Lily's table, impressed by how the young girl handled herself against the Grandmaster. Others watched the state champion's aggressive approach or the professor's methodical defense. Few paid attention to Lynn's table. Those who did saw nothing remarkable, just standard opening moves from what appeared to be an ordinary recreational player facing a chess legend. But by move 7, something subtle had changed. Anton's pace slowed slightly when he reached Lynn's board. He no longer made his moves with theatrical flourish, but instead stood a bit longer, his expression more focused. The change was so slight that only those who knew him well noticed it. One of those people was Dmitri, Anton's longtime friend and unofficial assistant, who had traveled with him to countless tournaments. Dmitri had been chatting with local club members but now drifted closer to Lynn's table. He watched as Anton studied the board with narrowed eyes before making his move. After Anton moved on, Dmitri lingered, observing Lynn. She sat quietly, studying the position. There was nothing flashy about her play, nothing that would catch a casual observer's eye. But Dmitri noticed how she considered the entire board before touching any piece, how her eyes moved systematically across the position, how she seemed to be calculating several moves ahead. By move 10, a small crowd had begun to form around Lin's table, not because they understood what was happening, but because they had noticed Anton spending more time there. The Grandmaster's expression had changed subtly, the theatrical smile replaced by a look of genuine concentration. As Anton completed his circuit and approached Lin's table for the 11th move, the room grew quieter. Something was happening, though few could say exactly what. Anton stood behind his chair, his hands gripping the backrest as he studied the position. The showman had disappeared. In his place stood the calculating machine that had defeated world champions. Lin sat calmly, her eyes on the board, hands folded in her lap. She seemed oblivious to the growing attention, to the whispers that had begun to circulate through the community center. For her, there was only the game, only the 64 squares and 32 pieces that had been her quiet companions for decades. When Anton finally made his move and walked away, his stride lacked its earlier swagger. Chess enthusiasts in the audience exchanged glances. Those who understood the game enough to follow what was happening realized they were witnessing something unexpected. "Who is she?" someone whispered. The question rippled through the room, but nobody had an answer. Lin Zhao was just a name, a stranger who had come to watch a chess exhibition and somehow found herself in the middle of a story that was taking an unexpected turn. By the 15th move, the atmosphere in the community center had transformed. What began as a light-hearted exhibition had become something else entirely. The other 4 games continued, but they now seemed like sideshows to the main event. More than half the audience had gathered around Lin's table, watching in growing amazement as the quiet woman matched the Grandmaster move for move. Anton no longer spoke as he approached her board. Gone were the theatrical gestures and the explanations meant for beginners. His jaw was set in concentration, his eyes rarely leaving the pieces as he considered his options. He had abandoned his blazer 2 moves ago, draping it over a nearby chair as if preparing for a fight. Lin remained exactly as she had been from the start, composed, methodical, her movements economical. The only difference was a slight gleam in her eyes, a hint that she was thoroughly engaged in the battle unfolding. On the board. "What's happening?" whispered a teenage boy to his father, both newcomers to chess who had come to see a celebrity. "I'm not entirely sure," the father replied, "but I think the Grandmaster might be in trouble." Hector Gomez, the club president, had positioned himself where he could watch both the board and Anton's face. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching wonder. He had organized dozens of exhibitions over the years and had never seen anything like this. "Pawn to e5, Lin said quietly as she made her move, breaking the silence that had enveloped her table. Anton's eyebrows rose slightly, not at the move itself, which was solid, but at the confidence with which she played it. He studied the position, for nearly 3 minutes, by far his longest pause of the afternoon. The crowd waited, barely breathing. Even the other players had begun to glance over between their own moves. Finally, Anton moved his bishop to g5, pinning Lin's knight against her queen. He nodded slightly, satisfied with his choice, then moved to the next table. But his pace had slowed considerably, and he spent less time with his other opponents than before. "Who is she?" The question continued to ripple through the room. People checked their programs, asked neighbors, looked to club members for answers. But Lin Zhao's name meant nothing to anyone present. Dmitri, Anton's friend, had positioned himself where he could watch Lin's reactions. What he saw puzzled him. There was none of the nervousness typical of amateurs facing masters, none of the hesitation or second-guessing. She played with the quiet confidence of someone who had sat across from champions before. After Anton's 18th move, Dmitri slipped away from the crowd and pulled out his phone. He stepped into the hallway, where he could speak without disturbing the players, and made a call. "Pavel, it's Dmitri. Listen, Anton is playing a simultaneous exhibition in Philadelphia, and there's a woman here." "Yes, a player. Her name is Lin Zhao. Chinese, I think, maybe early 60s. Can you check if there's anything on her? He listened for a moment, then added, Yes, I know it sounds strange, but trust me. Anton is fully engaged. I haven't seen him this focused outside a major tournament in years. Meanwhile, the game continued. Lin had sacrificed a pawn to develop an attack on Anton's kingside. It was a sophisticated strategy, the kind used by players who can calculate many moves ahead. The crowd had grown so quiet that the click of pieces on the other board seemed intrusive. A gray-haired man in thick glasses had been recording the moves in a small notebook. He showed his notations to another spectator, pointing at a sequence with a trembling finger. Brilliant, he whispered. Simply brilliant. That pawn sacrifice opens lines for both her knight and bishop. If Korovin isn't careful, she'll have a mating attack in 6 or 7 moves. The other spectator looked skeptical. Are you sure? This is a Grandmaster we're talking about. I've been playing chess for 40 years, the older man replied. I know brilliance when I see it. By move 22, even the chess novices in the room could sense the tension. Anton's return to Lin's table was now the focal point of the exhibition. He stood behind his chair, one hand gripping the backrest, the other rubbing his chin as he contemplated the position. The board had opened up, with pieces attacking and defending in complex patterns. Lin sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap when not moving pieces. There was no triumph in her expression, no hint that she knew she was accomplishing something remarkable. There was only concentration and what might have been a touch of enjoyment. Anton finally moved his queen to d2, defending against Lin's most immediate threat. As he did so, he looked directly at her for the first time since the game had turned serious. You play very well, he said quietly, not for the audience but for her alone. Lin met his gaze. Thank you. So do you. The simple exchange sent another ripple of whispers through the crowd. It was an acknowledgement from one serious player to another that this was now a real contest. Dmitri returned from the hallway, his expression puzzled. He caught the eye of Hector Gomez and motioned him over. Anything? Hector asked in a low voice. Dmitri shook his head. Nothing definitive. Pavel is still looking. But he found a reference to a Lin Zhao who played in a few tournaments in China in the late 1970s. Very few records from that period, though. Could it be the same person? The age would be right. But why would a Chinese player from 45 years ago be sitting in a community center in Philadelphia, unknown to anyone in the chess world? Their conversation was interrupted by a collective gasp from the crowd. Lin had just captured Anton's knight with her bishop, exposing his king to a check on her next move. It was an elegant combination that had apparently caught the Grandmaster off guard. Anton stared at the board, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. Not his showman's smile, but the genuine appreciation of a chess player who recognizes a beautiful move. He nodded slightly, acknowledging the quality of her play before focusing again on finding the best response. The other 4 games had become afterthoughts. The state champion had already resigned, accepting defeat graciously. The mathematics. Professor was clearly losing but fighting on. Young Lily was holding her own, earning admiring glances from those who occasionally remembered to check her board. The junior city champion was in a complex middle game that might have attracted attention on any other day, but all eyes were on Lin and Anton. By move 28, a remarkable thing happened. Anton stopped circulating between the tables altogether. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from Lin, focusing exclusively on their game. He gestured to Dmitri, who quickly went to the other tables to explain that the Grandmaster would return to those games shortly. I hope you don't mind, Anton said to Lin. I find myself wanting to give our game my full attention. Lin nodded. Of course. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something historic was unfolding before them. Chess enthusiasts explained positions to novices in hushed tones. Phones recorded the scene, though no flash photography was allowed. The community center staff, who had planned to begin setting up for an evening event, quietly decided to postpone their preparations. At move 30, Lin initiated a sequence of exchanges in the center of the board. Pieces came off rapidly. A bishop for a knight, a rook for a rook, pawns captured and recaptured. When the dust settled, she had a slight material advantage and the superior pawn structure. Anton leaned back in his chair, studying not just the board, but the woman across from him. There was newfound respect in his gaze, curiosity mingled with admiration. "May I ask where you learned to play?" he inquired during a moment when they were both considering the position. Lin looked up briefly. "At home, then at university. It was a long time ago." "Did you compete?" A shadow passed across her face so quickly that most observers missed it. "Briefly, in another life." Anton nodded, understanding there was a story there but not pressing further. Chess players, more than most, respected the boundaries between the game and personal matters. By move 35 they had reached an endgame: king, queen, and 4 pawns for Lin against king, queen, and 3 pawns for Anton. Endgames were where grandmasters typically shined, where their deep understanding of chess principles and countless hours of study gave them an edge over even very strong players. Yet Lin played with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout. Her moves came after appropriate consideration, neither rushed nor hesitant. She advanced a pawn toward promotion, forcing Anton to use his queen defensively rather than aggressively. Dmitri had returned to the hall after making another phone call. He watched the game with growing fascination, occasionally checking his phone for messages. Whatever information he was seeking remained elusive. The clock on the community center wall showed that nearly 3 hours had passed since the exhibition began. What was planned as a 2-hour event had extended well beyond its schedule, but nobody complained. The staff had brought water for the players and opened windows to keep the room comfortable despite the crowd. At move 40, Anton made a slight miscalculation. Not a blunder. Grandmasters rarely make obvious mistakes, but a subtle misjudgment of the pawn structure. Lin capitalized immediately, advancing her queen to create a double threat that could not be defended against. Anton saw it too late. He stared at the board, calculating furiously, looking for an escape that wasn't there. The room held its collective breath. Finally, Anton did something that sent shockwaves through the audience. He tipped over his king, the universal sign of resignation in chess. "I resign," he said clearly. "Well played." The room erupted in applause, startling Lin, who seemed to have forgotten they had an audience. She looked around, suddenly self-conscious, as if waking from a dream to find herself the center of attention. Anton extended his hand across the board. Lin hesitated for just a moment before taking it. In that handshake there was respect, wonder, and a shared understanding that transcended language and culture. The silent acknowledgement between two people who spoke the same beautiful, complex language of chess. The applause continued for nearly a minute, washing over Lin in waves that seemed to both please and unsettle her. She remained seated, her hands now fidgeting slightly with the edge of her cardigan. Anton had risen from his chair and was smiling, a genuine smile, not the performative one he had worn earlier. He gestured toward Lin, encouraging the audience to direct their appreciation toward her. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said when the clapping finally subsided, "we have witnessed something remarkable today." His accent seemed stronger now, his words carrying the weight of sincere emotion. "This is why chess is the greatest game ever invented. On any given day, anyone can play a beautiful game." The crowd murmured in agreement. People were already pulling out their phones, searching for information about Lin Zhao. Who was this woman who had defeated a grandmaster in front of a room full of witnesses? Hector Gomez stepped forward, his face flushed with excitement. The club president looked like he had just witnessed a miracle, which in the world of chess he nearly had. "Ms. Zhao," he said, "would you mind saying a few words? I'm sure everyone would love to hear from you." Lin looked up, clearly uncomfortable with the spotlight. She glanced around the room at the expectant faces, then back at the chessboard, as if wishing she could return to the quiet world of 64 squares where she felt at home. I just played the game," she said softly. Mr. Korovin is very skilled. I was fortunate today. Anton shook his head emphatically. Not fortune. Skill, precision, understanding. He turned to the audience. That was not a lucky win. That was mastery. A young woman near the front raised her hand, then spoke, without waiting to be acknowledged. Ms. Zhao, have you played in tournaments before? Lin hesitated, then nodded slightly. Yes? Long ago. Where? Someone else called out. In China, before I came to America. Her answers were brief, each word seemingly measured before being released. Dmitri had made his way to Anton's side and was showing him something on his phone. The Grandmaster's eyebrows rose as he read whatever was on the screen. He looked at Lin with newfound curiosity, then whispered something to Dmitri, who nodded and stepped away. A small crowd had formed around Lin's table, but people maintained a respectful distance, sensing her discomfort with the attention. The other games had concluded. The mathematics professor and the junior champion had both resigned, while young Lily had managed a draw, a remarkable achievement that would have been the highlight of any other day. An elderly man with a press badge from a local newspaper squeezed through the crowd. Ms. Zhao, would you be willing to do an interview? This is quite a story. Before Lin could answer, Hector intervened. Let's give Ms. Zhao some space, everyone. This has been an unexpected turn of events for all of us. He turned to Lin. Would you like some water? Perhaps a moment of quiet. Lin nodded gratefully. Yes, please. Some water would be nice. As Hector went to fetch water, the crowd reluctantly gave Lin some breathing room. People drifted toward the faux refreshment table or formed small groups to discuss what they had witnessed. The exhibition had transformed into something between a celebration and a mystery, with Lin at the center of it all. Anton had returned to check on his other opponents, congratulating Lily on her draw and discussing key positions with the mathematics professor. But his attention kept drifting back to Lin, who sat quietly at her table, seemingly lost in thought. Dmitri approached Lin with a gentle smile. Ms. Zhao, I hope you don't mind, but I made some inquiries. Your name seemed familiar to some of our friends in the chess world. He spoke carefully, watching her reaction. Would you happen to be the same Lin Zhao who played in the Guangzhou City Championship in 1978? Lin looked up, surprise evident in her face. You found records of that? Dmitri nodded. The chess world has a long memory, even if the records from that time are incomplete. They say you defeated 3 masters in that tournament. Lin's expression softened, a distant memory playing across her features. 4, actually, but that was another lifetime ago. This exchange caught the attention of nearby listeners, who moved closer again. Anton, noticing the gathering crowd, came over to join them. Ms. Zhao, he said, I would be honored if you would tell us your story. Only if you wish to, of course. Hector returned with a glass of water, which Lin accepted gratefully. She took a small sip, then looked around at the expectant faces. Something in the genuine interest she saw there seemed to help her make a decision. There isn't much to tell, she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. I learned chess from my father when I was 7 years old. He was a mathematics teacher who loved the game. We played every evening after dinner. She paused, taking another sip of water. The room had grown quiet again, everyone straining to hear her soft voice. I was good at calculations, at seeing patterns. My father took me to a local chess club when I was 12. The men there didn't want to play with a girl at first. A faint smile touched her lips, but my father was persistent. Anton nodded, understanding. Even now, women faced barriers in the chess world. In the 1960s and 70s, especially in traditional societies, those barriers would have been formidable. By 16, I was playing in city tournaments. By 18, I had won the women's championship in my province. Lin's gaze drifted, looking beyond the community center walls to a past only she could see. There was talk of national competitions, even international ones. What happened? Someone asked gently when she fell silent. Lin's expression changed, a shadow passing over her features. Life happened. The Cultural Revolution was ending, but its effects lingered. My father was criticized for encouraging bourgeois pursuits. Like chess, he lost his teaching position. The room was absolutely silent now. Even those who knew little about Chinese history understood the weight of what she was saying. We moved to a different city. I found work in a factory. Chess became dangerous in a way, a reminder of what we had lost. She straightened in her chair. Later, when things improved, I played in a few local tournaments. That's what your friend found records of. Dmitri nodded. You won the Guangzhou City Championship. I did, Lin acknowledged. But by then I was 28. Too old to begin a serious chess career, everyone said. And there were other priorities. You came to America? Anton prompted, gently. Yes, in 1982. I married a Chinese-American professor who visited Guangzhou on an academic exchange. We moved to Philadelphia. Her voice softened. He passed away 10 years ago. And the chess? Hector asked. Did you continue playing? Lin nodded. At home, mostly. My husband wasn't a strong player, but he enjoyed the game. After he died, I joined a small club at the library. Nothing serious, just friendly games with retirees. She gestured to the book of chess puzzles she had brought with her. I solve puzzles to keep my mind sharp. Sometimes I play online anonymously. Anton exchanged glances with Dmitri. The idea of this extraordinary player quietly solving puzzles and playing anonymous games online when she could have been competing at high levels seemed almost tragic. Ms. Zhao, Anton said, you play at a master level, perhaps even higher. Your understanding of positional chess, your calculation abilities, these are rare gifts. Lin shook her head modestly. I'm out of practice. Today was unusual. A woman in her 30s pushed forward slightly. Ms. Zhao, I run the women's chess program at Temple University. We're always looking for coaches and mentors. Would you consider? She was interrupted by another voice. The state championship is next month. You should enter. More suggestions followed. Voices overlapping as people recognized the opportunity to bring Lin's talent into the open. Lin looked overwhelmed by the sudden flood of interest. Anton raised his hands, quieting the crowd. Perhaps we should give Ms. Zhao time to consider these generous offers. He turned to Lin. Chess welcomed me, gave me opportunities, friendships, a career. I would be honored to help you find your place in the chess community again, if that's what you want. Lin looked at the chessboard between them, where her victory still stood in the arrangement of the pieces. For a moment, something like longing flashed across her face, a glimpse of the young woman who had once dreamed of championships and international competition. I don't know, she said honestly. This wasn't what I expected when I came here today. The best games often take unexpected turns, Anton replied with a smile. The crowd laughed appreciatively at the chess metaphor. The tension in the room had transformed into something warm and supportive. What had begun as an exhibition had become a discovery, a connection across cultures and generations, a reminder of why people loved the ancient game. Hector stepped forward again. We're running well past our scheduled time, and I know the community center needs the space soon. But before we conclude, I'd like to present Ms. Zhao with a small token of appreciation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a chess piece, a queen carved from dark wood. This was meant as a gift for Grandmaster Korovin, but I think he would agree it has found its rightful owner. Anton nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. Hector placed the queen in Lin's hand. Welcome back to the chess world, Ms. Zhao. We've been waiting for you even if we didn't know it. Lin's fingers closed around the piece, her eyes bright with unshed tears. She didn't speak, but her nod conveyed everything that needed to be said. As the crowd began to disperse, people stopped by Lin's table to introduce themselves, offer congratulations, or simply shake her hand. Business cards and phone numbers were exchanged. Promises of future games were made. Lin accepted it all with quiet grace, though the overwhelm was still evident in her expression. Anton remained nearby, deflecting some of the attention when it seemed too much for her. For a man who had entered the room as the star attraction, He showed remarkable generosity in allowing someone else to shine. When the crowd had thinned considerably, he leaned toward Lin. "People will talk about this game for years to come," he said softly. The day a Grandmaster invited a modest woman to play chess as a joke, and what happened next silenced the room. Lin looked up at him, and for the first time that day she smiled fully, a warm, genuine expression that transformed her face. "Perhaps," she said, "it's time for a new chapter in an old story." 3 weeks passed like the quick movement of a chess clock. Lin's quiet life had transformed in ways she never imagined possible. Her phone rang constantly with calls from chess clubs, tournament organizers, and journalists seeking interviews. Her modest apartment, filled with books and memories, now had a corner dedicated entirely to chess. A beautiful wooden board set up with a problem she was analyzing, surrounded by notebooks filled with her neat handwriting. The morning light filtered through her kitchen window as she prepared tea, a daily ritual unchanged despite everything else. Her hands moved with the same careful precision she showed at the chessboard, measuring the leaves, warming the pot, timing the steep. As she waited, she glanced at the newspaper on her table, folded open to an article with the headline, "Unknown Chess Master Defeats Grandmaster Korovin." Below it was a photo of her and Anton shaking hands across the board, both looking equally surprised in their own ways. The doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Lin checked her watch, right on time. She opened the door to find Anton and Dmitri standing there, both dressed casually but neatly. "Good morning, Ms. Zhao," Anton said with a slight bow. "Ready for our game?" Lin smiled and stepped aside to let them in. "Please, call me Lin. And yes, the board is set up in the living room." This had become their routine over the past 2 weeks, Anton visiting 3 times a week to play chess with Lin. What began as a gesture of respect after the exhibition had evolved into something more, a friendship between 2 people who spoke the same language of pawns and knights, attacks and defenses. Dmitri carried a small cake box from a local bakery. "I hope you don't mind. A small thank you for the tea last time." Lin accepted the box with a nod. "Very thoughtful. Please make yourselves comfortable while I bring the tea." Her living room was modest but warm, with photographs of her late husband and their life together displayed on shelves alongside books, in both English and Chinese. A beautiful wooden chess set, a gift from the Philadelphia Chess Club, was set up on a small table by the window, pieces arranged in their starting positions. Anton settled into a chair, his eyes drawn immediately to the board. Chess players were like this, Lin had noticed, unable to resist the magnetic pull of those 64 squares, those 32 pieces waiting to be brought to life. As she arranged cups on a tray, Lin reflected on how quickly everything had changed. The day after the exhibition, her story had spread through chess forums and websites. Someone had recorded her game against Anton and uploaded it with analysis, generating thousands of comments. Local news had picked it up first, then national chess publications. Within a week, she had received invitations to 3 tournaments and countless chess clubs. She carried the tea tray into the living room, where Anton was already studying the position on her analysis board in the corner. "Botvinnik versus Tal 1960, he asked, not looking up. Lin nodded, impressed by his recognition. "Yes, I've been studying Tal's sacrificial style, so different from how I naturally play." "The best players understand all styles," Anton said, accepting a cup of tea. Though we each have our preferences, they settled into their places at the main chessboard. These games between them had become something special, not public performances, but private explorations of chess ideas, honest competitions, between 2 players who respected each other. "White or black today?" Lin asked. "Your home, your choice," Anton replied with a smile. Lin turned the board so the white pieces faced Anton. "You take white today." As Anton made his opening move, pawn to e4, a classic, Dmitri settled into an armchair with his tea, content to watch. He had become something of a manager for Lin, helping her navigate the sudden attention, filtering requests, and offering advice about which opportunities to pursue. The state championship committee called again yesterday, he mentioned casually. They're very eager to have you participate. Lynn moved her pawn to c5, the Sicilian defense, before responding. I'm still not sure. It's been so long since I played. In a formal tournament. Anton developed his knight to f3. You would do well. Your play is sharp. It's not about winning or losing, Lynn said, bringing out her own knight. It's about exposure, attention. The three settled into a comfortable rhythm, the game progressing, conversation flowing around it like water around stones in a stream. This was what Lynn valued most about these morning sessions, the camaraderie, the mutual respect, the shared love of chess without the pressure of spectators or expectations. I understand your hesitation, Anton said after a thoughtful pause. Fame changes things. I remember when I first became well known, it was uncomfortable. Lynn looked up from the board, curious. How did you handle it? Anton smiled ruefully. Not always well. I let it affect my play for a time. Made mistakes trying to be flashy instead of solid. He moved his bishop to c4. But eventually, I realized that what matters is the game itself. The pieces don't care if cameras are watching or if people know your name. They played in silence for several moves, the position growing more complex. Lynn had improved even in these few weeks, her natural talent sharpened by regular play against a strong opponent. Anton no longer held back, giving her his best game, which she met with equal strength. Dmitri set down his cup. There's something else you should know, Lynn. That video of your game has gone viral in China, over 2 million views. People are calling you the forgotten queen of Chinese chess. Lynn's hand froze above her bishop. In China? Really? Yes. Sports channels there want interviews. They're digging up old records, talking to people who remember the tournaments you played in. There's even talk of a documentary. Lynn's expression was complex, surprise, nostalgia, and something like concern. That part of my life is so far away now. Anton observed her reaction carefully. You don't have to respond to any of it, you know. You can just play chess for the joy of it. Here, locally, with friends. Lynn nodded, appreciating his understanding. She returned her attention to the board and moved her bishop to capture Anton's knight, a strong move that forced him to reconsider his strategy. The thing is, she said as Anton studied the position, I've been thinking about the young girls at that university chess program I visited last week, how they looked at me. She paused, remembering their eager faces. One of them asked if I would teach her attacking combinations. She said she'd never had a female chess coach before. Anton nodded, making his move. A queen to d4, pressuring Lynn's position. You could make a difference there. Perhaps. Lynn countered with her queen to c7, defending and preparing for a kingside attack simultaneously. I'm also thinking about my father, how proud he would be to see me playing again. The game continued, growing more intense. Both players leaned forward, fully engaged in the battle on the board. Dmitri watched in admiration, occasionally making notes. He had seen Anton play hundreds of games against the strongest players in the world, but there was something special about these matches with Lynn, a purity to them, a focus on chess as art rather than sport. After a particularly complex exchange in the center, Lynn sat back and took a sip of her now cool tea. I've decided something, she said suddenly. Both men looked at her expectantly. I will play in the state championship, and I'll accept the position as advisor to the university women's chess program. Her voice was firm, her decision clearly made. But I won't do the television interviews or the documentary. Not yet, anyway. Anton smiled broadly. Excellent. The chess world will be richer for your participation. There's one more thing, Lynn added, her eyes returning to the board. I'd like you to continue our games if you're willing. They've been valuable to me. It would be my honor, Anton replied sincerely. They've been valuable to me as well. You've reminded me why I fell in love with chess in the first place. Lynn moved her rook to e8, setting up a powerful threat. Check, she said quietly. Anton, chuckled, seeing both the immediate check on the board and the metaphorical check to his previous life assumptions. He moved his king to safety but knew the position had shifted in Lin's favor. As they continued to play, the morning sun rose higher, casting long squares of light across the board, illuminating the pieces like actors on a stage. Outside, the Idam city went about its business, cars honking, people rushing to work, the rhythm of ordinary life continuing. But in this quiet apartment, two chess players created something extraordinary move by move, an unfolding story of strategy and creativity. Later that afternoon, after Anton and Dmitri had left, Lin sat alone at the chessboard, replaying their game in her mind. She had won again, though it had been close, a complex endgame where a single misstep would have changed everything. Anton had congratulated her warmly, pointing out moments of brilliance in her play with genuine admiration. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Hector from the chess club. Lin, wonderful news. The organizers of the Eastern Regional Masters have offered you a special invitation. No qualifying necessary. They want you in the main event. Lin listened as Hector explained the details, his voice bubbling with excitement. This tournament would have strong players from all over the East Coast, including several masters and maybe even another Grandmaster. Will you accept? He asked finally. Lin looked at the chessboard, at the wooden queen Hector had given her 3 weeks ago, now positioned in triumph near the center of the board. Yes, she said, surprising herself with how right it felt. Yes, I'll play. After hanging up, Lin walked to her bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album. She turned to a page showing a young woman, herself, 45 years earlier, standing behind a chess table, eyes intense with concentration. Beside it was a newspaper clipping in Chinese, yellowed with age, announcing her victory in the provincial championship. She touched the photo gently. A new chapter in an old story, she whispered to herself, echoing the words she had spoken to Anton weeks ago. Outside her window, spring flowers had begun to bloom in the small community garden across the street. Lin watched them sway in the breeze, thinking about cycles and seasons, endings and beginnings. At 63, she had never expected to begin again, to rediscover a passion she had set aside decades ago. Yet here she was, planning tournament strategies and analyzing positions, her mind alive with the infinite possibilities of chess. She returned to her analysis board and reset the position, seeing new ideas, different approaches. The wooden pieces felt familiar in her hands, old friends returning after a long absence. As she worked through variations, Lin felt a sense of purpose and joy that had been missing for years. The queen she moved across the board wasn't just a piece of wood. It was a symbol of reclaimed identity, of a journey coming full circle. The modest woman who had been invited to play as a joke had found her way home to the chessboard, and this time, she wasn't going anywhere. 6 months later, the conference room of the Grand Hotel buzzed with anticipation. Photographers adjusted their cameras while journalists checked their recorders. At the center of it all was a long table with microphones, water glasses, and name cards. One read, Anton Korovin, Grandmaster. Beside it, another displayed, Lin Zhao, Eastern Regional Champion. Outside, autumn painted Philadelphia in shades of gold and crimson. The chess world's attention, however, was firmly fixed indoors, where the press conference for the upcoming International Masters Invitational was about to begin. Lin sat quietly in a small preparation room, her hands folded in her lap, breathing deeply. She wore a simple navy blue suit, a concession to the formality of the occasion, but had refused makeup or any other attempts to polish her appearance for the cameras. At 63, she felt she had earned the right to present herself as she was. A gentle knock on the door preceded Hector's entrance. The chess club president who had first introduced her to Anton now served as her unofficial assistant, helping her navigate the increasingly complex demands on her time. They're ready whenever you are, he said. Full house out there, even some Chinese media. Lin nodded, rising smoothly from her chair. I'm ready. The past 6 months had unfolded like a carefully calculated series of chess moves. The state championship had been her first formal tournament in decades. She had been nervous, sleeping poorly the night before, haunted by dreams of forgotten rules and missed opportunities. But once the games began, muscle memory took over. Her mind, always good at calculation, seemed to remember its old pathways. She finished third overall, defeating 2 masters and drawing with the eventual champion. That performance had led to an invitation to the Eastern Regional Masters, where Lynn had shocked everyone, perhaps even herself, by winning the entire tournament. Her final game, a beautiful positional masterpiece against a strong international master from New York, had been reprinted in chess publications worldwide. Now, chess had reclaimed a central place in her life. She taught 3 days a week at the University Women's Program, spent 2 mornings playing with Anton when he was in town, and dedicated her evenings to study and preparation. Her small apartment had become something of an unofficial chess salon, with players of all levels stopping by to analyze positions or simply talk about the game. She followed Hector through the hallway toward the conference room, mentally preparing for the questions that would come. Public speaking still didn't come naturally to her, but she had learned to focus on the message she wanted to convey rather than the size of the audience. "Remember," Hector said just before they reached the doors, "you don't have to answer anything that makes you uncomfortable." Lynn smiled at his protectiveness. "I'll be fine." They entered the conference room to a flurry of camera flashes. Lynn blinked but kept walking, her posture straight, her expression composed. Anton was already seated at the table, and he stood, when he saw her, pulling out her chair with the same courtesy he had shown at their first meeting. Though this time there was no condescension in the gesture, only respect. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked quietly as they sat down. Lynn nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Tomorrow would mark their first official game against each other since that fateful exhibition. They had played dozens of times in private. Their record, remarkably even, but this would be different. A featured match in a prestigious international tournament, with rating points and prize money at stake. The tournament organizer, a tall woman with a commanding presence, stepped to the microphone. "Good morning, and thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the International Masters Invitational, which begins tomorrow here in Philadelphia. We're particularly excited about our special feature match between Grandmaster Anton Korovin and Eastern Regional Champion Lin Zhao." More camera flashes, more murmurs from the assembled press. Lin kept her expression neutral, though inside she still marveled at how her life had changed in half a year. The questions began predictably enough, about tournament preparations, expectations, the strength of the field. Anton handled most of these with practiced ease, having done hundreds of such press conferences over his career. Lin answered when addressed directly, her responses brief but thoughtful. Then a journalist from a Chinese publication raised his hand. "Ms. Zhao, your story has inspired many in China, especially young women chess players. What would you say to a girl who dreams of becoming a champion but faces obstacles?" Lin leaned slightly toward the microphone. "I would tell her that chess is a journey that can last a lifetime. My path was interrupted, but the beauty of the game remained in my heart. There is no single road to mastery." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. "And how does it feel to return to competitive chess after so many years away?" Lin considered the question carefully. "Like returning to a beloved homeland after a long exile, both familiar and new at once. The pieces are the same, but my understanding has deepened with time and experience." Anton nodded beside her, clearly appreciating her answer. Their friendship had evolved over these months into a partnership of sorts. He had helped reintroduce her to the modern chess world, while she had reminded him of the pure joy of the game beyond ratings and titles. Another reporter raised a hand. "Grandmaster Korovin, how do you feel about facing Ms. Zhao in an official capacity tomorrow, after your exhibition game became such a famous story?" Anton smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Nervous," he admitted, prompting laughter from the room. "Lin is a formidable opponent who sees the board with remarkable clarity. Our practice games have been closely contested. Tomorrow's match will be a genuine challenge, and I look forward to it." Ms. Zhao, called another journalist, there are rumors that you've been offered a book deal to tell your life story, and possibly even a film option. Any comment? Lin shook her head slightly. I'm focused on chess right now. My story is still being written on the board. The questions continued for another 20 minutes before the organizer wrapped up the session. As Lin and Anton rose to leave, photographers called for them to pose together. They stood side by side, the tall Russian Grandmaster and the petite Chinese woman, an unlikely friendship forged through the ancient game they both loved. In the hallway afterward, they were approached by a small group of young girls clutching chess books and boards. Would you sign these, Mrs. Zhao? Asked one, her eyes wide with admiration. We're from the city school chess program. Lin's expression softened as she took the offered pen. Of course. Do you all play? The girls nodded eagerly. One of them, perhaps 10 years old, said, I want to be like you when I grow up. Lin paused, momentarily overcome. She signed the books carefully, adding a personal message to each girl. Remember, she told them, the queen is the strongest piece on the board. Later that evening, Lin sat alone in her hotel room, a chessboard in front of her. She was reviewing possible openings for tomorrow's match, considering what Anton might play, preparing her responses. A pot of green tea steamed beside her, another constant in a life that had changed so dramatically. Her phone chimed with a message. It was from her niece in California, wishing her luck and sending love. Family had been surprised but supportive of her return to chess. Her late husband's brother had even traveled to watch her play in the regional championship. Another message arrived, this one from Dmitri, sharing a link to an article titled, The Queen Returns, Lin Zhao's Remarkable Chess Renaissance. She didn't click on it. She had stopped reading most of the coverage, finding it distracted from her focus on the game itself. Instead, she returned to the board, moving pieces, testing ideas. At one point, she found herself recreating the position from that first game against Anton, the moment when the exhibition had transformed from a joke into something meaningful. Her fingers lingered on the queen, remembering the move that had first made Anton take notice. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Anton and Hector, both bundled in warm coats. We thought you might want to join us for a walk, Anton said. Clear your mind before tomorrow. Lin hesitated, looking back at her preparation board. The pieces will wait, Hector added. Fresh air might help. She nodded and reached for her coat. They were right. She had prepared enough. Chess had taught her many things over the decades, but perhaps the most valuable lesson was knowing when to step away and trust her instincts. The three walked along the riverfront, their conversation drifting from chess to music, from philosophy to simple observations about the city lights reflected in the water. They carefully avoided discussing tomorrow's game, giving Lin the mental space she needed. As they turned back toward the hotel, Anton said, Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know how much your return to chess has meant to me personally. You've reminded me why I fell in love with the game as a boy. Lin smiled in the darkness. And you gave me the chance to reclaim a part of myself I thought was lost forever. So we're even. The next morning, Lin woke before dawn, her mind clear and focused. She went through her usual routine, stretching exercises, tea, a light breakfast. When she finally sat across from Anton in the tournament hall, cameras positioned to capture their every move, spectators filling the seats around the playing area, she felt surprisingly calm. The tournament director asked them to shake hands before the game. As their hands met, Anton whispered, "Play well." "You too," Lin replied. The director signaled the start of the round, and Anton, playing white, made his first move. Pawn to d4, a departure from his usual king's pawn openings. Lin recognized it immediately as a sign of respect. He was playing his most solid repertoire, taking no chances. She responded with pawn to d5, meeting him in the center, and their game began in earnest. For the next 5 hours, they battled across the board, creating a game that commentators would later describe as a masterpiece of modern classical chess. The position remained balanced throughout, neither player able to gain a significant advantage. They reached an endgame with equal material, testing each other's technique and understanding. On move 78, with both players down to their last minutes on the clock, Anton offered his hand across the board. "Draw?" he asked quietly. Lynn looked at the position once more, confirming what she already knew. Neither side could make progress. She took his hand. "Draw." The spectators applauded enthusiastically. What they had witnessed wasn't a decisive victory for either player, but something perhaps more beautiful, a perfectly balanced contest between two chess artists at the height of their powers. As they signed their score sheets, Anton smiled at Lynn. "I think we gave them a good show." "Yes," she agreed. "A good game." Later, as chess websites analyzed their match move by move and journalists wrote about the showdown that ended in harmony, Lynn sat quietly in her hotel room again. Her next tournament game would be tomorrow, against a young Grandmaster from India. Life would continue. Chess would continue. Her story would continue. She opened her old photo album to the picture of herself as a young champion, then placed beside it a newspaper from today with a photo of her at the board. The young woman with dreams and the older woman who had reclaimed them, both part of the same journey. On the chessboard nearby, she set up a new position, looking not backward, but forward. There were still so many beautiful games to play,